Good afternoon, and welcome to our first ever virtual capstone presentation series. These seniors have worked exceptionally hard all year to research their topics in order to produce a sizable written project as well as the presentation you are about to see. As a reminder, the presenter can't see your comments in the chat in real time, but I can. So at any point during the presentation, you can post questions or comments. At the end of the presentation, I'll ask for questions to be submitted in the chat, and I'll pick some of those out to ask our presenter. Sometimes capstone projects are based on particular interests of the student. Other times they are born out of that student's desire to learn more about a part of themselves. Jack took the learning differences he's worked with his entire life and leveraged them into a project that helped him better understand not only his own situation, but also to help others understand both the various complications of learning differences and how schools and universities can best help those students. Jack, how are you doing today?
Not too bad. Thank you for having me.
All right. Are you ready
let's get started?
All right. You're ready to go.
Yeah.
Great.
Ready to
I'm
go,
going to put you up here, and away you go.
All right. So to start off today, we're going to be talking about the challenges and successes of a student with a learning disability. Before we get started, a couple things we're going to be talking about today is the top 5 most common learning disabilities, the laws surrounding learning disabilities, the diagnosis process, the documentation process, and the difference between high school and college. A few interesting facts before we get started. Did you know that in an average classroom, there are between 5 to 12% of students that have a learning disability? That means that out of 54 students, which is our senior class, 3 to 6 students have a learning disability. Also, more boys than girls have a learning disability. People with learning disability are of average intelligence, if not above average intelligence, and it is important to note that many CEOs and important people in the world have a learning disability and are successful. So now we're going to be going to Gary Cohn. So Gary Cohn, as most of us, we know him as a regular commentator on TV, but formerly he was President Trump's advisor and also Goldman Sachs president. With that, I chose to talk about him because he suffered with dyslexia his entire life. He chose not to let that define who he is, and he worked with it and became a very successful person in the work field. So now we're going to be moving on to what are learning disabilities. So the learning disabilities are neurological problems that cause intelligent children and adults to have difficulty with comprehension and processing skills. The term learning disability does not signify one disability. The word acts as an umbrella term for all different types of disabilities. A learning disability often gets mixed up with learning problems such as low intelligence, blindness, or emotional disturbances. It is important to note that learning disabilities cannot be cured or fixed, only coped with and accommodated for. Learning disabilities do not restrict a child from being smart. They prevent a child from learning or understanding material presented to them when using traditional teaching methods. The result of a learning disability is unknown, but it is said to be a result of how the brain is developed, and sometimes genes can play a role. Learning disabilities don't only affect a student in the classroom, but also outside. Some students are faced with trouble organizing, time managing, abstract reasoning, and which can also cause problems outside the classroom. It is very important to understand that learning disabilities have to be diagnosed at an early age. If a student does not get the assistance they need, they may fall behind, and as schoolwork gets harder, it just gets worse for them. When a student does not get the assistance they need, they tend to dislike school and have a lower self-esteem. Before we move on, it is important to remember that someone with a learning disability can gain academic success and get good grades. We will be moving on to the diagnosis process now and how that works. So, the diagnosis phase starts the process of having a child evaluated for a learning disability. Usually, a teacher or parent notices that a child is struggling with an assignment or certain subject and doesn't respond to the normal teaching methods. When a learning disability is brought to the attention and/or pointed out, a number of steps are done before a student is classified with a learning disability. Most times at the beginning of this process, the teacher may try things in the classroom. An example could be moving their seat to a better place to see if this causes their discrepancy. Once it is known that the student does in fact struggle in a normal classroom environment, a team of specialists will come in to start the diagnosis phase. This evaluation can include a variety of learning specialists, speech therapists, child psychologists, and/or neurologists, depending on what the student seems to be displaying. Without the diagnosis, a student cannot receive any formal services and/or accommodations. We will see later that this is the result of laws that have been created to protect a student with learning disabilities. Before an evaluation can be done, the laws require that a written document to be signed by a parent giving permission to start the process. Once permission is signed off on, the first evaluation is made inside the classroom to make sure nothing there is causing the students underachievement. It is more important to note that this process is done with more than one evaluator, like I said before. A formal diagnosis can take several evaluations and a variety of tests to be administered to the student and be fully completed. This can take up to a year. These specialists all individually meet and evaluate the student's learning and likely form of learning disability and/or learning disabilities, as many students who have one have two or three. These tests are created by age group so that they are geared to the age of the student so that their scoring results are easier to make sense of. The student's scores on these tests make or break if the student is eligible for receiving services. In order to become eligible, there must be a significant enough gap between your knowledge and the other peer's knowledge. It is important to note that a student does not need to fail these tests to get help. They just need to score below their peers to a certain degree. The results of these tests usually are used to determine what accommodations or services the student will receive. It may require many meetings of the child study team and the parent to discuss what they are seeing and what they think will help the child best. After the student has been diagnosed, the process starts to begin, which is when the child study team starts to develop the student service plan, which we will hear about later in my presentation. At this point in time, a conference to discuss the student's disability must be sent to the parent 60 days prior to the scheduled date. Once this meeting takes place and the parents and child study team agrees, it is at this phase when the student is determined eligible or legible for receiving services. Before we move on, testing is not just done in the beginning, but it is done for the entire life of the child up until high school. Now we're going to be moving on to high school versus college and how students can move through that. Oh, my bad. Yes. There we go. So, as noted before, IDEA and the student's IEP ends when they graduate from high school. The laws do not extend into high school. Although students in high school and college are protected both under 504 of the Rehabilitation Act, the law does not govern what a student is entitled to in college. As previously noted, these laws are there to prevent a student from being discriminated on towards and being denied access for their learning disability. With that, colleges must provide accommodations and services at no cost to the student. Instead of an IEP or an ISP, it is up to the student to advocate for themselves to document the existence of their disability in order to receive services in college. This can be done by presenting the educational and psychological testing done in high school to the Office of Accommodations at their college. It is also up to the student to seek out help and register themselves with the school's disability office, as I said before. So we talked about how important self-identification and advocacy are. In order to be successful in college, the student needs to understand what they need in services. They need to be able to speak up for themselves that they don't have an IEP, and they need to work with their professors to get what they need. In both school settings, the school utilizes the student service plan according to their IEP for public school, but not in private schools. Oh, my bad. Now we're going to be moving on to the top 5 learning disabilities. So the first one would be dyslexia. Dyslexia is the most common learning disability that has been recognized the longest. It is a disability that affects an individual's reading and language-based processing skills. Individuals faced with dyslexia may have trouble with speech and writing. Although dyslexia has been around the longest, it is still one of the specialists that have yet to figure out. Psychologists believe that messages go between the left and right hemisphere of the brain instead of going directly to the hemisphere that controls the function, thereby impairing their ability to read and master the reading process. It is not one thing, which is why it is so hard to recognize and take time to identify all the characteristics of dyslexia. Now we'll be moving on to dyscalculia, the second most common learning disability, which is a disability that affects an individual's math skills, number comprehension, distinguishment between mathematics symbols, and problems with memorization and organizing of number layout. Dyscalculia is similar to dyslexia, as they both have similar effects, just one of them affects a student's math ability and the other affects their grammar ability. Think about reading a foreign language for the first time. This is what it's like for people who have dyscalculia. Dyscalculia prevents a student from understanding basic math facts and hinders their ability to learn complex material. It helps to teach math using practical concepts and applying them to real-life situations, and to not look at problems as just math. Now for auditory processing disorder. It is the least known disability that affects the individual's ability to understand and comprehend words, pronunciation, and their ability to distinguish between letters and sounds, which is, like I said, similar to dyslexia. Your brain doesn't hear sounds in the usual way. It's not a problem with understanding the meaning of what someone is saying, but for example, if someone says, "Please raise your hand," someone with auditory processing may hear, "Please haze your plan." Okay? Individuals faced with this oftentimes are easily frustrated as clear directions can sometimes be misinterpreted, resulting in wrongdoings. Students who suffer from this may also have social problems, as this sometimes causes the individual to miss social cues that cause other children to pick on them. Teachers can make their instructions as clear as possible and check on students' notes and assignment pads to make sure they got it right. They can also use visual tools like highlighters and visual tools so that the students don't have to spend much time trying to listen, instead just learning. Now for dysgraphia. Okay? It is a learning disability that affects fine motor skills and handwriting. It impairs a student's ability to write, hold a pencil, and organize their thoughts, and write sometimes. Oftentimes, individuals with this learning disability also have a weak organization skills, difficulty in spelling, and trouble thinking and writing at the same time. It is likely hard for most of you to imagine, but for someone with dysgraphia, they are not able to see missing elements if they reread their work. They need to be taught to review their work several times, looking for spelling, then looking for capitalization, and after going back and looking at punctuation. You can start seeing how much extra time this takes, as it does all work for a student with learning disability. This disability, like all learning disabilities, is possible to overcome. Of course, not cured completely, as once an individual has a disability, with them forever, and it cannot be coped with, or cannot be cured or fixed. Now for ADHD. Lastly, ADHD, which is not a disability but a disorder, which makes it hard for an individual to concentrate when doing schoolwork. Because this is protected by the same laws as other LDs, individuals may suffer from control over behavior and control over hyperactivity. They have problems staying on task, paying attention to detail, and getting distracted easily. Research tells us that up to 30 to 50% of individuals with ADHD also have another learning disability, most times dyslexia. Okay. So now we will be going on to the various teaching methods for learning disabilities. So, when teaching a learning disability, it is extremely important for teachers, parents, doctors to be able to point out signs of disability so that the student can get the right tools they need. Some states require teachers to have advanced degrees and higher qualifications, but others allow for general education teachers to teach LD with just a little extra training. In most school environments, the student is placed into a general classroom where he or she is there for most of their academic day and taken out of for a small period of time to go over learning resources and tools they can use when learning. Students in today's world are now benefiting from what technology has to offer. I myself love to use voice to text, which is a software in your computer that allows you to speak instead of typing. This helps students who may have dyslexia or dysgraphia, who have trouble comprehending syllables and or having trouble spelling. It allows the student to get their ideas out without having to worrying about typing, spelling, or grammar errors. A few other things that everyone uses is spell check, Grammarly, and these are all the things that LD students use. In math, services with technology are a little bit more limited, although when a student gets older, LD students are allowed a calculator no matter the circumstances. Some students, like myself, also have an accommodation that allows for them to create a handwritten so-called cheat sheet that is present during the test or the assessment to help guide the student. This is due to the fact that the math disabilities affect students from memorizing number placement, symbols, and formulas. The notes are used to remind the student of the steps that have to be performed during certain problems. Examples of accommodations, like I said, are note takers, recorded class sessions, extended exam time, and quiet testing locations. There are also visual, oral, and tactile demonstrations incorporated into the instructions. Okay. So now we're going to be moving on to slide 18, which we come back to Gary Cohn. I talked about him in the beginning of my presentation, and I come back to him for the end. I do this because, I mean, he really worked with his learning disability and never really let it signify who he was. He got his job because he sat inside I guess you could say, an office for about 3 hours waiting for an important businessman to walk out. And when he did, he offered him to hop in a cab where he was going to the airport. Now, Gary did not have to go to the airport, but because he wanted an opportunity, he said, I'm going to follow this guy, got in the cab with him, spoke about some business topic, and he got a job the very next Monday. I don't know. It kind of summarizes the life of a learning disability. He's prone to failure, as I feel like I am. As a result of his learning disability, he is not afraid of failure, like I just said, and he's a very successful man. With that, my presentation is over. I want to say thank you for everyone who came out. With that, I'm done.
All right, Jack, congratulations. Thank you.
Thank you.
I am going to take this opportunity to give some people some time to post some questions that they might have for you in the chat. While that's happening, I'll just ask you, was there anything in particular that you learned during your research for this project that you find especially helpful to you or interesting to you?
Yeah, like I said, I would say like kind of the inspirations on who's older and who kind of actually got through life with learning disabilities. I mean, I didn't really learn anything new. I always knew like what learning disabilities were, but to see actually like real people, and of course like Gary Cohn, someone who's in politics and worked for our president, like I think that's pretty cool that he can do that and he suffered from a learning disability. So, I mean, to answer your question, I don't think I learned anything, but I definitely took some valuable pieces of information with me.
Okay. Is there anything in particular that stands out as something that you would want to make sure that viewers came away with
Yeah,
overall?
definitely. A learning disability does not signify who you are. All it does is just affect how I learn. I mean, I have a learning disability. I know I messed up probably 100 times in that presentation, but I mean, learning disabilities, like I said, they don't like signify who I am. All they do is just, I mean, say how I learn or prove how I learn. So with that, yeah, that's it.
Okay. Was there anything that you wished you'd had time to get to, or any other uh,
Yes,
learning issues
complete.
that you didn't have a chance to dig into that you would have liked to get to if you had a follow-up for this?
Yeah, I definitely wanted to get some interviews with I mean, not even the coronavirus. I mean, it kind of did interflict with the coronavirus because I did have interviews set up in the weeks upcoming. With that, interviews would have been cool. I mean, my mom is not friends with Gary Cohen, but she did work with him. I did have a setup meeting with him, but it fell through, of course. That's kind of the only thing I would like to get to or kind of have in my presentation, but I didn't get to that.
All right. It looks like there's a couple of questions popping in now. Do you think that there are certain careers where students with certain learning differences can thrive because of their learning difference, not despite it? That's from Miss Patient, actually.
You know, honestly, no, I don't. I truly feel that, like I said, people with learning disabilities all have different problems in their life. So me, I have difficulty with math. So I would kind of go to the career with communications and my writing skills. But there could be someone who has severe dyslexia, like my cousin, for example. Severe dyslexia, but he's phenomenal at math. So to answer your question, no, like there's no really career that signifies people with learning disabilities because there's so many learning disabilities out there that not everyone has the same signs or I guess you could say problems.
Okay. Dr. Holden says, great job, Jack. How do businesses and the professional world accommodate and respond to learning differences?
You know, that's a good question because honestly, like people who don't have learning disabilities, they can't like set aside their entire life goals and go like learn about learning disabilities. Like that's not what I'm asking people to do. But I mean, it's just like kind of like normal daily tasks, like being nice. Like if you like, for example, if someone in your workplace, like Ranney's a perfect place, you see a teacher who has trouble with computers. They're not good with computers, but you are. They can't figure out like how to copy and paste because they can't figure out symbols or they can't remember formulas. I mean, I don't know. I don't even know how to answer that question actually.
No, that's all right. Uh, let's see. Miss Oriel says, great job, Jack. Did you find any information about the age when children are typically referred to in evaluation? And do you think that timeline can vary in public versus independent schools? And this is one of those things where I should have prefaced all these questions by saying there are times when your research just never took you in that direction. So if that's the case, then you can say as much. But
I'm
it
trying to fit no like that my re like because I like literally looked at everything learning disabilities have to offer, so I can definitely answer that question.
okay,
I don't think I have like I don't think I've researched enough, honestly. Like I haven't taken enough time to answer that question. I
okay,
have a little bit to answer from that, but not enough. I would need
okay,
to research a little bit longer.
all right. Did you
Yeah.
have a general age that kids were referred at all? Like, was this something that you would see in elementary school and high school?
Yeah, okay, fine. I would say fifth grade is when a student and or I mean like parents, teachers, and like neurologists can sense that a student has a disability. When you're in like kindergarten up until fourth grade, I mean students have difficulty learning. Like it's just known. Like you're not going to know normal math skills. That's when you're learning. But when you get to fifth grade, that's when I guess your brain is sort of it's developed, and you can kind of see a discrepancy in certain students' abilities in any type of
Okay.
academic.
Dr. Martin wants to know why do so many CEOs seem to have learning differences? Or asked another way, is there something that innate in them or their experience that makes them better suited to lead organizations?
That's a good question. I actually like that one. To be honest, my preference and why I think that is because they're not scared of failure. People that don't have a learning disability, they only want to go so far. But people with learning disability, they don't see like the end mark. They just see beyond. Like I don't know. I don't know.
So you're
It's hard to
saying
answer. I
they're
like that.
used to having difficulties or obstacles to overcome, so they don't sweat
They
them as
just see
much.
beyond. Yeah, they see beyond the problem. Like Gary Cohn, for example. I mean, I don't know if you guys are familiar with it, but he practically told the president to go, beep himself. So with that, like, I don't think a normal person would ever say that. And I mean, I just, I don't know, like that to answer that question, like people with learning disabilities, they're not scared of failure, and I feel like that resonates with me so much that it's like the one thing I'm always going to say is like I don't know. Like Elon Musk, for example, he doesn't have a learning disability, but the number one thing he says is he'll go beyond. Like there's nothing's impossible for him. So for someone with a learning disability, then they don't feel like anything's impossible because it's always impossible. It's always just another task for him.
Hmm.
So
Um, let's see. Uh, so Dr. Martin followed up that maybe they're also more creative than traditional thinkers, that they have to think about things in a different perspective, which that was just a follow up that I saw in the comments there.
yeah,
There's something else to consider. And then CJ said, great job, Jack. In the future, do
thank
you
you.
think you would be interested in researching learning disabilities or working in a field that deals with them?
To be honest, I never thought about it. With taking this class, yeah, I definitely would. I would definitely like to go into like teaching students with learning disabilities. I don't know if I'd like to be like a tutor, but I definitely like to like work in like the learning lab like at Ranney. I think that's a lot of fun. I mean, you get to work with a lot of different students, not just one student, and I mean, you get to work with generations of kids at a time. So I think that would be an awesome job.
All right. Well, Jack, you have completed your capstone presentation, and with that, your course, and with that, your Ranney High School career. So congratulations, and good luck in your future endeavors, and over the summer and then in school next year. I'm going to just remind all of the people watching that if you uh, haven't already, and you need to fill out the attendance sheet that's in the chat, you can go do that now. And if you are able, you are more than welcome to join us again at 2 o'clock for Lucy Martin's presentation on animal sentience. That will be again at 2 o'clock. So we hope to see you then. Have a great day.